The telegram arrived on the same day Patrick Ellis buried his uncle, and both felt like punches to his already bruised gut. He stood in the small cemetery outside Greeley, Colorado, watching the handful of ranch hands shovel dirt over the pine coffin while the preacher droned prayers into the October wind of 1882. The envelope in his coat pocket weighed more than it should, containing words that would change everything whether he wanted them to or not. Patrick had ridden 3 weeks from Texas when the first telegram found him, the one saying his Uncle Thomas had taken ill and the ranch needed him urgently. He had arrived 2 days too late. Pneumonia had claimed the old man, and now Patrick stood as the sole heir to the Dusty Creek Ranch, a spread of 300 acres that his uncle's lawyer informed him was drowning in debt. The second telegram came from a lawyer's office in Denver, delivered by a boy on horseback, just as the last shovelful of earth covered his uncle's grave. Patrick had tipped the boy a nickel and torn open the envelope with dirt still under his fingernails. It informed him that his Uncle Thomas had, 6 months prior, entered into a contract with a matrimonial agency in Boston. A mail-order bride named Theresa Gallagher was set to arrive in Greeley in exactly 1 week, prepaid passage and contract fees totaling $200. The contract was binding, the lawyer's neat script informed him, and the money was non-refundable. His uncle had apparently staked his last bit of credit on securing a wife to help save the failing ranch. Patrick was 26 years old, had never been married, and had exactly $14 to his name. He stared at the telegram until the words blurred, then stuffed it back in his pocket and walked to the small ranch house that was now his inheritance and his burden. The house was drafty, the barn needed new shingles, and half the fence line had rotted through. The cattle that remained numbered maybe 60 head, a fraction of what the ranch could support. The 3 ranch hands his uncle had employed stood in an awkward cluster by the corral, clearly waiting to hear if they would keep their jobs. "I cannot pay you what you are owed right now," Patrick told them honestly. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that his mother had always said looked like storm clouds. "But if you will give me until spring, I will make it right. I promise you that." The oldest hand, a weathered man named Bill Santos, spat tobacco juice and nodded. "Your uncle was a good man. We will stay." Patrick felt a small knot of tension loosen in his chest. "Thank you." That night he sat at his uncle's desk and went through the ledgers by lamplight. The numbers painted a bleak picture. His uncle had borrowed against the property twice, once to buy cattle that had been stolen by rustlers, and again after a harsh winter killed most of the herd. The bank held notes totaling nearly $800, due in full by April. Without a miracle or a very profitable winter, Patrick would lose everything. He found the letters from the matrimonial agency tucked in a drawer. His uncle's handwriting, shaky in those final months, had requested a strong, capable woman who knew farm life. Someone who could work alongside a man, not just keep house. The agency had responded with glowing recommendations of Miss Theresa Gallagher, aged 23, lately of Boston but originally from a farming family in rural Pennsylvania. Her photograph showed a young woman with dark hair pulled severely back, a straight nose, and eyes that seemed to look directly through the camera with an unsettling intensity. Patrick had 7 days to decide what to do. He could meet her at the station and explain that his uncle had died, that the contract was void. He could offer her passage money back to Boston, though he had no idea how he would scrape together that sum. Or he could honor the contract himself, marry a complete stranger, and hope that somehow she truly could help save a dying ranch. He looked at the photograph again. There was something in those eyes, a determination or maybe desperation that matched what he felt in his own chest. Maybe she needed this as much as he did. Maybe that would be enough. The week passed in a blur of work. Patrick and the hands rode fence lines, patched what they could, and moved the cattle to better grazing. He spent evenings cleaning the ranch house, which had fallen into bachelor disarray during his uncle's illness. He washed curtains, scrubbed floors, and aired out the spare bedroom, all while feeling absurd about preparing for a bride he had never met and was not sure he wanted. On the 7th day, he rode into Greeley before dawn. The town was small but growing, with a main street of businesses serving the surrounding ranches and farms. The train from Denver was due at noon, and Patrick used the morning to visit the general store, the feed supplier, and finally the bank. The bank manager, a soft-handed man named Cunningham, was sympathetic but firm. "I understand your situation, Mr. Ellis, but the bank has obligations too. Your uncle was granted considerable leeway already. Without payment by April, we will have to foreclose." "I understand," Patrick said, though the word tasted bitter. "I will have your money." "I hope so, son. I truly do." Patrick left the bank feeling like a man walking to his own hanging. He stopped by the saloon for a whiskey he could not afford, then made his way to the train station. The platform was nearly empty. A few townspeople waited for mail or freight, and a young mother with 2 children sat on a bench. Patrick leaned against a post and watched the eastern horizon, where smoke from the approaching train was just beginning to smudge the sky. He tried to imagine what he would say. How did you greet a woman who had traveled 2,000 miles expecting to marry a 60-year-old rancher, only to find his nephew instead? The whole situation felt like a bad joke, except no one was laughing. The train arrived in a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam. Patrick watched passengers disembark, scanning for a woman matching the photograph. He saw a salesman with sample cases, 2 cowboys, an elderly couple, and then her. Theresa Gallagher stepped down from the passenger car carrying a single worn valise and wearing a traveling dress of dark blue that had seen better days. She was smaller than he had expected, barely reaching his shoulder, with dark brown hair pinned up under a practical bonnet. Her face was pale with exhaustion, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights on hard train seats. She looked around the platform with that same intense gaze from the photograph, clearly searching for someone. Patrick straightened and walked toward her, his heart hammering stupidly. "Miss Gallagher," she turned, and up close her eyes were a startling green. She looked him up and down with an expression he could not read. "You are not Thomas Ellis." "No, madam, I am Patrick Ellis. Thomas was my uncle." He removed his hat. "I am sorry to have to tell you that he passed away last week. Pneumonia." He watched her process this information. A dozen emotions flickered across her face too quickly to name, settling finally into something that looked like resignation. "I see," she said quietly. "Then I suppose the contract is void." "It does not have to be," Patrick heard himself say. The words came out before he had fully thought them through. "The ranch still needs help. I still need. That is, if you were willing, we could honor the contract. Between us, I mean." She stared at him. "You are proposing we marry, you and I, 2 complete strangers." That was the original arrangement, was it not? He felt his face heat. "I know it is not ideal, but you came all this way, and I could use—" He stopped, not wanting to sound too desperate. "The ranch needs someone like you. Someone strong. The contract said you knew farm work." "I do." She set down her valise with a thump. "Mr. Ellis, I will be blunt. I have exactly $6 to my name and no means to return to Boston. My family farm was sold after my father died, and I have no home to go back to. I came west because I had no other choice." Her honesty startled him. Then we are in similar situations. I inherited a failing ranch and debts I cannot pay. I need help and I can offer you a home and a name. It is not much, but it is honest." They stood looking at each other while the train hissed steam behind them and the other passengers dispersed into town. Patrick could see her weighing options, calculating odds. Finally, she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "All right then." "When?" "The preacher could do it today, if you are willing." "I am too tired to care anymore about romance or courtship, Mr. Ellis. Let us be practical people in a practical arrangement. Today is fine." And that was how Patrick Ellis found himself standing in front of Reverend Matthews 3 hours later, with Theresa Gallagher beside him and Bill Santos and the Reverend's wife as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Theresa's hand was steady when she took his, her voice clear when she spoke her vows. Patrick slipped a plain gold band on her finger, one that had belonged to his mother, carried in his pocket since she died 10 years ago. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Matthews said. Patrick leaned down awkwardly and pressed a chaste kiss to Theresa's cheek. Her skin was soft and smelled faintly of rosewater. She did not pull away, but she did not lean in either. They signed the marriage certificate, paid the Reverend $2 Patrick could not spare, and walked out into the afternoon sunlight as husband and wife. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Theresa sat beside Patrick on the wagon bench, her valise at her feet, looking out at the Colorado landscape with an unreadable expression. The October sun was warm, but the wind carried the promise of winter. "It is beautiful," she said finally. "Harsher than Pennsylvania, but beautiful." "It can be hard country," Patrick agreed. "Winters are brutal. Summers can be just as bad, but there is good grazing and the water rights are solid. With work, the ranch could thrive again." "What happened to it?" He told her about the rustlers and the harsh winter, about his uncle's declining health and poor decisions made from desperation. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "So we need to make it to spring without losing everything." "That gives us about 6 months." "Yes." "What is the plan?" Patrick glanced at her, the setting sun caught in her hair, turning it auburn. "Honestly, I am still working on that." "Well then, I suppose we will figure it out together." The ranch house looked small and lonely as they approached in the gathering dusk. Patrick helped Theresa down from the wagon, very aware of how light she felt, how small her waist was under his hands. She thanked him politely and picked up her valise. Inside, he lit lamps while she looked around the main room with its stone fireplace, simple furniture and bare walls. He had cleaned, but it still looked like what it was, a house without a woman's touch for too many years. "The bedroom is through there," Patrick said, gesturing to the door on the left. "I will take the spare room." Theresa turned to look at him. "This is your house, Mr. Ellis. I will take the spare room." "Patrick, and no, you take the main bedroom. It is proper." Proper would have been a courtship and a real wedding, not two desperate people making a bargain on a train platform. But her voice was not unkind. "However, I am too tired to argue. Thank you, Patrick." The sound of his name in her voice did something strange to his chest. "Are you hungry?" "I can make something. I can cook. That is part of my duties now, is it not? You just traveled 2,000 miles. Let me." He made a simple meal of beans and bacon, with bread from the general store and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. They ate at the small kitchen table, the silence between them not quite comfortable but not hostile either. "Tell me about yourself," Patrick said. The contract did not say much. Theresa wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "What do you want to know? Anything. Everything." "We are married now. I should know more than your name." She smiled slightly, the first real expression he had seen from her. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges that travel and exhaustion had carved. Fair enough. I am 23, as you probably know. I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, third of 5 children. My father raised dairy cattle and grew corn. I learned to work from the time I could walk. What brought you to Boston? After my father died, my oldest brother inherited the farm. His wife made it clear there was no place for me there. I went to Boston to work as a seamstress. She paused. It did not suit me. I missed open sky and honest work. When I saw the advertisement for the matrimonial agency, it seemed like a chance to go back to the life I knew. No sweetheart back east. No, her voice was flat. There was someone once. He married a girl with a larger dowry. No, I was always moving around, working different ranches. Never stayed anywhere long enough to court anyone properly. Until now. Until now, he agreed. They cleaned the dishes together, working in a companionable silence that felt oddly natural. When everything was put away, Theresa picked up her valise. I should sleep. Tomorrow we can discuss the ranch and what needs doing. Good night, Theresa. Good night, Patrick. He watched her close the bedroom door, then stood alone in the main room feeling like his life had been picked up and shaken like a snow globe. This morning he had been a bachelor heir to a failing ranch. Tonight he had a wife. The whole thing felt surreal. He went to the spare room, which was barely large enough for the narrow bed and small dresser, and lay awake listening to the house settle. Through the wall, he could hear Theresa moving around, the rustle of her unpacking. Eventually, the sound stopped and the house fell silent. Patrick stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had done. Morning came with rooster crow and pale sunlight. Patrick woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, which startled him so much he dressed quickly and went to the kitchen. Theresa was already up, fully dressed in a simple work dress with her hair in a practical braid, standing at the stove like she had been doing it her whole life. "You did not have to get up so early," he said. "Cows do not milk themselves, and chickens do not feed themselves." She poured him coffee. "I assume there are both. Some chickens, yes. We do not have dairy cattle, just beef stock. Then I will see to the chickens after breakfast. What else needs doing?" They ate quickly, then Patrick gave her a tour of the ranch. She walked the property with him, asking sharp questions about water sources, grazing rotation, and the condition of the outbuildings. When they reached the cattle pasture, she leaned on the fence and studied the herd with a practiced eye. "They are thin," she said. "Yes. We have been moving them to better grass, but it is late in the season. You will lose some over winter." "I know." She turned to look at him. In the morning light, he could see faint freckles across her nose and the way her eyes caught the sun like green glass. "How much are you not telling me?" Patrick sighed. "We owe the bank $800 by April. We have maybe 60 head of cattle, most of them too thin to sell for good prices. I have 3 hands I cannot properly pay. The fences need replacing, the barn needs work, and I have about $12 left." $800 in 6 months. Theresa did the math quickly. "Can we sell cattle?" "Not until spring. They need to fatten up first, and prices are better after winter anyway. Then we need another income source." She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "My mother used to sell eggs and butter to the townspeople. I could do that with chickens. It is not much, but it is something. We would need more chickens. So we buy more or trade for them. Chickens are cheap." She pushed away from the fence. "What else can we sell or trade?" Over the next hour, they walked the property and took inventory. Patrick found himself impressed by how quickly Theresa grasped the situation and started solving problems. She suggested selling off some of the older equipment his uncle had hoarded, trading work with neighboring ranches for supplies, and planting a large kitchen garden in the spring to reduce food costs. "It will not solve everything," she admitted as they walked back to the house. "But it might buy us time and reduce our costs. You have done this before." "My father nearly lost our farm twice. I learned to stretch $1 until it screamed." She looked at him. "I will not let us fail, Patrick. I did not come all this way to watch another farm die." The determination in her voice stirred something in him. This was not the scared, exhausted woman from the train platform. This was someone who knew how to fight. "Then we will not fail," he said. Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine. Patrick and the ranch hands worked sunrise to sunset on repairs and moving cattle. Theresa took over the household, but she was not content to just cook and clean. She expanded the chicken coop, started selling eggs in town, and began working on a plan for the spring garden. She kept the books too, her neat handwriting replacing his uncle's shaky scrawl, tracking every penny that came in or went out. They were partners in the truest sense, working toward a common goal. But they were still strangers in many ways. Patrick slept in the spare room, and Theresa maintained a polite distance. They talked about the ranch constantly, but rarely about themselves. It was a marriage of convenience, and both of them seemed determined to keep it that way. November brought the first serious snow. Patrick woke one morning to find 3 inches on the ground and Theresa already outside feeding the chickens. She looked up as he approached, her cheeks pink from the cold. "We should bring the chickens into the barn," she said. "It is going to get colder. We have a coop. The coop is poorly insulated. We will lose them in a hard freeze." She brushed snow off her shoulders. "Trust me, I know chickens." He helped her move the chickens, and that night the temperature dropped below freezing. By morning, Patrick had to admit she had been right. The thermometer by the door read 10 degrees, and the water in the trough had frozen solid. "Pennsylvania gets cold," Theresa said when he mentioned it. "I know winter." They worked through November and into December, preparing for the worst of winter. Patrick and the hands moved the cattle to the closest pastures, where they could be fed hay through the deep snows. Theresa preserved everything she could, filling the root cellar with supplies. They still did not touch beyond the necessary brushes of hands or shoulders in passing, but Patrick found himself noticing things. The way Theresa hummed while she worked, how she always saved the best portions of dinner for him. The fact that she mended his shirts without being asked, and that the spare room somehow always had fresh linens when he came in from a long day. Small kindnesses, offered quietly. One evening in mid-December, a blizzard rolled in with terrifying speed. Patrick and Bill barely made it back from checking the cattle before visibility dropped to nothing. They stumbled into the barn half frozen, and Theresa was there with blankets and hot coffee. "Bill, you will stay in the house tonight," she said firmly. "That bunkhouse is not warm enough for this." She set Bill up by the fireplace with blankets while Patrick thawed out in the kitchen. His hands were so cold they burned as feeling returned, and he fumbled with the coffee cup. "Here." Theresa took his hands in hers and rubbed them briskly. Her hands were small but strong and warm from the fire. "You should know better than to stay out in this. The cattle needed checking. The cattle will not thank you if you freeze to death." But her voice was gentle. She kept rubbing his hands until the color returned, then poured him fresh coffee. "Can you feel your toes?" "Yes, Mother," he said, teasing. She swatted his arm, but she was smiling. "I am your wife, not your mother, though apparently both have to keep you from doing foolish things." It was the first time she had referred to herself as his wife outside of official contexts, and it made something warm bloom in Patrick's chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. The blizzard lasted 3 days. Bill slept by the fire, and Patrick stayed in his small room, while Theresa kept them all fed and the house warm. On the 3rd evening, When the wind finally died down and stars appeared through breaking clouds, Patrick found her sitting by the window looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "Beautiful, is it not?" she said softly. "Yes." But he was looking at her profile the way lamplight caught in her hair. She turned and caught him staring. For a moment, something passed between them, quick and electric. Then she looked away, color rising in her cheeks. "We should check on the cattle tomorrow," she said. "Yes, tomorrow." That night, Patrick lay awake thinking about his wife. Not the business partner who helped run the ranch, but the woman. The way she laughed when the chickens escaped their pen. How she sang to herself when she thought no one could hear. The stubborn set of her jaw when she was determined about something. He was starting to realize that what had begun as a practical arrangement was becoming something else entirely. At least for him. Christmas came quietly. They could not afford extravagance, but Theresa made a special dinner with a chicken she had been fattening. Patrick surprised her with a new pair of work gloves from the general store, bought with money from selling a piece of old equipment. "You did not have to," she said, but she was clearly pleased. "Your old ones were worn through. You will get frostbite." She opened his gift to find a warm wool scarf she had knitted herself, working on it by lamplight when she thought he was asleep. "For those foolish trips to check cattle in snowstorms," she said. They ate dinner together, just the two of them since the hands had gone to town to celebrate. The house was warm and smelled of roasted chicken and apple pie. Theresa had even found pine branches to hang over the mantel, and the lamplight made everything feel golden and peaceful. "This is better than I expected," Theresa said quietly. "When I got on that train in Boston, I was so frightened. I thought I was making a terrible mistake. And now—" She looked at him, her green eyes serious. "Now I think maybe it was the best decision I ever made." Patrick reached across the table and took her hand. She did not pull away. Her fingers laced through his, small and warm, and they sat like that while the fire crackled and snow fell softly outside. "Theresa," he said, "this arrangement, our marriage, I know it started as something practical, but I need you to know something." "What?" "I am grateful you are here. Not just for the ranch, but for you. These past months you have become important to me, more than just a business partner." She squeezed his hand. "I feel the same way. I did not expect to, but I do. So what do we do about it? I suppose we could try being an actual married couple, if you want." "I want." His heart was hammering. "Very much," she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. "Then maybe you should stop sleeping in that tiny spare room." That night, Patrick moved his things to the main bedroom. They lay in the big bed together, nervous as teenagers, until Theresa turned to him and kissed him properly for the first time. It was sweet and tentative and perfect. Patrick pulled her close, marveling at how right it felt to hold her, how natural. "I am falling in love with you," he whispered against her hair. "Good," she whispered back, "because I am falling in love with you too." They made love slowly, learning each other in the lamplight, and afterward lay tangled together talking until dawn. Patrick told her about his childhood in Texas, about losing his parents young and working his way across the West. Theresa told him about Pennsylvania and Boston, about her dreams and her fears. They shared secrets and stories, building the foundation they had skipped over in their hasty marriage. By morning, they were not just husband and wife in name. They were partners in every sense, and the ranch felt different because of it. Theresa sang as she worked, and Patrick found himself smiling for no reason. The hands noticed and made gentle jokes about newlyweds, which made them both blush. January was brutal. The temperature dropped below zero for days at a time, and they lost 3 cattle to the cold despite their best efforts. Patrick was devastated, doing the math on how much money they had just lost, but Theresa held him that night and reminded him they still had 57 head. They were not finished yet. She increased her egg sales, even convinced the hotel in town to buy from her regularly. Every penny went into the jar they kept for the bank payment. Patrick sold more old equipment and took on some carpentry work in town when the weather allowed. Slowly, painfully, the total in the jar grew. February brought a brief thaw, and Patrick used it to ride to the neighboring ranch to talk to a man named Henderson who ran a much larger operation. Henderson was a gruff man in his 50s who had known Patrick's uncle. "I heard Thomas passed," Henderson said. "Sorry for your loss. Heard you married some Eastern girl, too." "Yes, sir, Theresa. She is from Pennsylvania originally. She know ranch work better than I do in some ways." Henderson nodded approvingly. "Smart to marry practical." "What can I do for you, son?" Patrick laid out his situation honestly. He needed to sell cattle in the spring but wanted good prices, which meant access to the cattle buyers that came through the larger ranches. Could Henderson include the Dusty Creek cattle in his spring sale? "What is your cut?" Patrick asked. "No cut. Your uncle helped me when I was starting out. I will help you the same way." Henderson stuck out his hand. "But that wife of yours better be as good as you say, because you are going to need all the help you can get." Patrick rode home feeling like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. March came in like a lion with another blizzard, but it left like a lamb. The snow began to melt, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. The cattle had survived, though they were thinner than Patrick would have liked. Still, they were alive, and with good spring grazing they would fatten up nicely. Theresa planted her garden as soon as the ground thawed enough, working from dawn to dusk turning soil and planting seeds. Patrick helped when he could, but mostly he watched her work with a sense of awe. She was tireless, determined, and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with competence and strength. "You are staring again," she said without looking up from the row she was planting. "Can you blame me? My wife is remarkable." "Your wife is covered in dirt and probably smells like the barn." "My wife is still remarkable." She stood and stretched, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand and leaving a smudge of dirt. Patrick walked over and gently wiped it away with his thumb. She caught his hand and pressed a kiss to his palm. "We are going to make it," she said. "I can feel it. Because of you. None of this would have been possible without you. We did it together." April arrived with the greening of the grass and the arrival of the cattle buyers. Henderson was true to his word, and the Dusty Creek cattle were included in the big spring sale. Patrick and Theresa drove their herd to Henderson's ranch, a full day's journey, and watched nervously as buyers examined the stock. The prices were not as high as Patrick had hoped, but they were fair. When the final tally was complete, he had earned $420 from the sale of 30 head of cattle. It was not quite enough for the bank payment, but it was close. They drove home with the money secured in Patrick's saddlebag and 27 cattle still to rebuild the herd. Theresa was quiet on the journey, doing calculations in her head. "We are short," she said finally. "I know. I have been thinking about that. The egg money might be enough to cover the gap. I have been saving separately." Patrick looked at her in surprise. "How much?" "About $200. He nearly fell off the wagon. 200. How? I have been selling more than just eggs. Baked goods, preserved vegetables, mending and sewing. The hotel buys a lot from me, and I have been very careful with household expenses." She looked proud of herself, as she should. "I was keeping it as emergency funds, but I think paying the bank counts as an emergency. Theresa." He stopped the wagon and pulled her into a kiss that made them both breathless. "You are incredible. You know that. I am practical." "There is a difference. You saved us. The ranch, me, everything. We saved each other," she corrected. "Now let us go pay that bank and be done with it. They rode into Greeley the next morning and walked into the bank together. Cunningham looked up from his desk with the expression of a man expecting to deliver bad news. Patrick set $620 on the desk in neat stacks. "I believe this settles our debt," Patrick said. Cunningham counted it twice, then looked up with genuine surprise and pleasure. "Mr. Ellis, I confess I did not think you would make it. Congratulations." "Thank you, but the credit goes to my wife." Cunningham smiled at Theresa. "Your husband is lucky to have you, madam." "I am the lucky one," she said, taking Patrick's hand. They walked out of the bank debt-free, and Patrick felt like he could fly. On impulse, he pulled Theresa into the general store and bought her a new dress, a pretty blue one that matched her eyes. She protested it was too expensive, but he insisted. "You have been wearing the same 3 dresses for 6 months while you saved every penny for the ranch. Let me do this." She accepted with tears in her eyes and kissed him right there in the store, not caring who saw. That night, they celebrated with a real dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury they had not allowed themselves before. They ate steak and potatoes and pie and talked about the future for the first time without the shadow of debt hanging over them. "We should buy more cattle," Theresa said. "Build the herd back up properly." "We will, but slowly. I do not want to overextend again." Patrick reached across the table for her hand. "I want to build something sustainable, something we can pass on someday, to our children, if we are blessed with them." Theresa's cheeks colored prettily. "I have been thinking about that. I am not getting any younger and I would like a family." "So would I." They went home that night with hope in their hearts and plans for the future. The ranch was theirs, truly theirs, and they had earned it through hard work and partnership and love. Spring turned to summer and the ranch began to thrive. Patrick bought 10 more head of cattle with careful budgeting. The garden Theresa had planted came in abundantly, providing food for the table and surplus to sell. The chickens multiplied, and she added a few pigs to raise for winter meat. In June, Theresa told Patrick she was pregnant. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and that night they lay in bed talking about names and planning for the nursery. "Boy or girl?" Patrick asked. "I do not get to choose," she said, laughing, "but I hope for a healthy child, whatever they are. A boy would be helpful on the ranch eventually. A girl could be just as helpful. I was, true. I should know better than to underestimate the women in my life." The pregnancy was not easy. Theresa was sick most mornings, and by August she was tired all the time. But she kept working, stubborn as always, until Patrick finally put his foot down. "You need to rest. Let me handle the heavy work. I am pregnant, not broken." "I know, but I love you and I want you and the baby healthy. Please, Theresa, let me take care of you for once." She finally agreed, though she still managed the household and the books. Patrick took over more of her outdoor chores, with help from the hands who had all become fond of Theresa and were excited about the coming baby. Fall came with its golden light and cooling temperatures. The cattle were fat and healthy. The garden had been harvested and preserved, and the ranch was in better shape than it had been in years. Patrick looked around at what they had built and felt a deep satisfaction. In late October, almost exactly 1 year after Theresa had arrived on that train, she went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that terrified Patrick, but the midwife from town was competent and calm. When dawn broke, he heard the thin wail of a newborn and nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife opened the door with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Ellis, and your wife is asking for you." Patrick stumbled into the bedroom to find Theresa exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Our son," she whispered. Patrick knelt beside the bed and looked at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had Theresa's nose and a surprising amount of dark hair. He was perfect and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "What should we name him?" Patrick asked. "I was thinking James." "After my father, James Ellis, I like it." Patrick kissed Theresa's forehead. "Thank you for him, for everything. You saved my life in every way that matters. You saved mine too. We saved each other, remember?" They brought James home from the birthing room to the main house, and the ranch hands took turns peeking in at the baby with gruff congratulations. Bill carved a little wooden horse as a gift, and the other hands pitched in for a proper cradle. The first year with a baby was exhausting and wonderful. James was a good baby for the most part, but he still needed constant care. Patrick and Theresa took turns walking him at night when he fussed, and they learned to function on very little sleep. But watching Theresa with their son, seeing her sing lullabies and nurse him and smile down at his little face, Patrick fell in love with her all over again. She was an excellent mother, patient and loving but also practical. When James cried, she did not panic. She simply figured out what he needed and provided it. The ranch continued to prosper. Patrick hired another hand in the spring to help with the increased cattle herd. Theresa's egg and garden business kept growing, and she started teaching some of the town women her preserving techniques for a small fee. Every dollar was carefully saved or reinvested in the ranch. By the time James was 2, walking and talking in simple sentences, the Dusty Creek Ranch had become one of the more successful small operations in the area. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and the future looked bright. "I want another baby," Theresa said one night as they lay in bed. James was finally sleeping through the night and they had reclaimed some of their privacy. "Are you sure? James runs you ragged." "I am sure. I want him to have siblings. I loved growing up with brothers and sisters, even when we drove each other crazy." Patrick pulled her close. "Then let us see what we can do about that." Their second child, a daughter they named Martha, was born in the spring of 1885. She had Patrick's gray eyes and Theresa's determination, making her opinions known from birth with powerful lungs. James was fascinated by his little sister, though he was also occasionally jealous of the attention she received. Life settled into a new normal with 2 children. The ranch kept them all busy, but they made time for family. Sunday dinners together, walks in the evening, teaching James to ride his first pony. Patrick would watch Theresa with their children and marvel at how far they had come from that awkward meeting on the train platform. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked her one evening. They were sitting on the porch while the children played in the yard, James pushing Martha in a little wagon. Coming west, marrying a stranger, Theresa looked at him in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment, do you?" "God, no. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I was supposed to marry your uncle, especially because of that. If things had been different, we might never have met. I would have missed out on this whole life." He gestured at the ranch, the children, everything they had built. "I would have missed out on you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think love was about grand gestures and sweeping romance, but this is better. Building something together day by day, choosing each other every morning, that is real love." "Agreed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, their children playing in the golden light. In the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. The ranch was thriving, the debts were paid, and the future stretched ahead full of possibility. That night, after the children were asleep, Patrick pulled Theresa close in bed and kissed her with the passion and tenderness of a man deeply in love. She responded with equal fervor, and they made love slowly, savoring each other. Afterward, she curled against his chest, her hand over his heart. "I love you, Patrick Ellis." "I love you too, Theresa Ellis." The years continued to pass peacefully. James grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch and the cattle, already showing signs of becoming a natural cowboy. Martha was more interested in the chickens and the garden, following her mother around and learning everything Theresa could teach her. In 1887, Theresa gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Thomas after Patrick's uncle. It seemed fitting to honor the man whose death had brought them together, whose final act of hope in hiring a mail-order bride had saved them all. The ranch continued to grow slowly and steadily. Patrick bought more land when the neighboring property went up for sale, expanding their grazing area. Theresa's various business ventures had become substantial, bringing in steady income that supplemented the cattle sales. They added onto the house too, building proper bedrooms for the children and a larger kitchen for Theresa. The ranch was no longer the failing operation Patrick had inherited. It was a successful family business, and the Dusty Creek Ranch was known throughout the area as well run and profitable. By 1890, when James was 7, Martha 5, and Thomas 3, Patrick looked around at what they had built and felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The boy who had arrived to bury his uncle and face impossible debt had become a successful rancher and father. One evening that summer, he found Theresa in the garden, picking vegetables for dinner while the children played nearby. She was 29 now, with a few strands of silver in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She had never been more beautiful to him. "Theresa," she looked up, smiling. "Yes, thank you. For what?" "Everything. For taking a chance on a stranger, for saving the ranch. For our children, for every day of the past 8 years. She set down her basket and walked over to him, cupping his face in her hands. "You are welcome. But Patrick, you need to stop thanking me. We built this life together. I could not have done any of it without you." "Partners?" he asked. "Partners," she agreed. "Always." He kissed her there in the garden with their children playing in the background and the evening sun warm on their backs. It was a perfect moment in a life full of them, and Patrick knew he was blessed beyond measure. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1890s. James proved to be a natural rancher, learning everything Patrick could teach him and showing real aptitude for the work. Martha had her mother's head for business and kept meticulous records of the egg sales and garden produce, even as a child. Young Thomas was still finding his way, but he was good with the horses and seemed headed in that direction. Patrick and Theresa grew older together, facing the challenges of ranch life as a team. There were hard years with drought and disease, and good years with abundant rain and high cattle prices. Through it all, they supported each other, their love deepening with time and shared experience. In 1895, when they had been married 13 years, Patrick surprised Theresa with a trip to Denver for their anniversary. They left the children with Bill and his wife, who had become like family over the years, and took the train to the city. It was Theresa's first trip away from the ranch since she had arrived, and she was delighted by everything. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate at fancy restaurants, and went to the theater. Patrick bought her a gold locket with pictures of the children inside, and she cried happy tears. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she said as they walked through the city streets hand in hand. "That scared girl on the train platform could never have dreamed all this. You were brave then, and you are brave now. That has not changed. Neither have you." Still the earnest cowboy who offered to honor a contract he did not make. "Best decision I ever made." They returned to the ranch refreshed and closer than ever. The children had behaved themselves, and life resumed its comfortable rhythm. But both Patrick and Theresa treasured the memory of that trip, a reminder that they were not just parents and ranchers, but also husband and wife who still cherished each other. The turn of the century came with celebration. They threw a party at the ranch for all their neighbors and friends, roasting a whole steer and dancing to fiddle music in the barn. James was 17 now, tall and strong, already doing a man's work on the ranch. Martha at 15 was beautiful and smart, with suitors already starting to call. Thomas at 13 was all gangly limbs and mischief, but showing real promise with the horses. Patrick looked at his family gathered in the lamplight and felt a swell of gratitude so strong it nearly choked him. From the ashes of his uncle's failing ranch, they had built something solid and lasting. A home. A legacy. Theresa found him standing alone by the barn door and slipped her hand into his. At 40, she was still the same determined, capable woman he had married, with silver threading through her hair and the confidence that came from years of meeting challenges head-on. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything. How far we have come, how grateful I am." "Me too." She leaned against him. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I get to wake up every day on this beautiful ranch with you and our children. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, I do not want to wake up." They stood together watching their children and friends celebrate, the ranch prosperous around them, and Patrick silently thanked his Uncle Thomas. The old man's desperate gamble on a mail-order bride had saved everything, in ways he could never have imagined. The early 1900s brought new challenges and changes. James married a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Sarah, and they moved into a house Patrick built on the property. Martha went away to school in Denver for 2 years, studying business and accounting, then came home to help manage the ranch finances more formally. Thomas proved to be a gifted horse trainer and started a small breeding operation on the side. Patrick and Theresa watched their children grow into capable adults with pride. They had given them a solid foundation and good values, and it showed in how they lived their lives. In 1905, James and Sarah gave Patrick and Theresa their first grandchild, a boy they named Patrick after his grandfather. Holding his tiny namesake, Patrick was overwhelmed with emotion. The continuation of the family, the proof that what they had built would outlast them, was almost too much to process. "Grandfather suits you," Theresa said, watching him rock the baby with tears streaming down his face. "Grandmother suits you too," she laughed. "I am too young to be a grandmother. You are 43. Exactly. Too young." But she was delighted with the baby, spoiling him shamelessly. The ranch continued to operate smoothly, with the younger generation taking on more responsibility. Patrick was 50 now, and while he was still active, he appreciated being able to step back a little. He and Theresa took more time for themselves, riding out to their favorite spots on the property just to enjoy the land they had fought so hard to keep. One afternoon, they rode to the ridge overlooking the ranch. Below them, the house and barns and corrals spread out in neat order. Cattle dotted the pastures, horses grazed near the creek, and they could see James working with some of the hands near the barn. "Look at what we built," Patrick said softly. Theresa smiled. "It is beautiful, is it not? More than I ever dreamed possible. And it is all because you came west on a train to marry a stranger. Best decision I ever made." She turned to him. "I love you, Patrick Ellis. More today than I did yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." He pulled her close and kissed her with all the love of more than 20 years together. "I love you too, always and forever." They sat on the ridge as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The ranch spread below them, solid and prosperous, a testament to hard work and partnership and love. Patrick thought back to that terrified young man who had stood on the train platform all those years ago, trying to figure out what to say to a mail-order bride meant for his dead uncle. He had been so uncertain, so worried about the future. He could never have imagined how it would all turn out. Theresa had saved the ranch with her determination and practical skills. But more than that, she had saved him. She had given him a home and a family, and a love deeper than he had known existed. She had turned a desperate arrangement into a beautiful life. In the years that followed, they watched the ranch continue to thrive under James's management. Martha married a banker from Greeley and became a powerful force in the local business community while still helping with ranch finances. Thomas built his horse breeding operation into a successful venture, known throughout Colorado for quality stock. More grandchildren came, filling the ranch with noise and laughter. Patrick and Theresa settled into the role of beloved grandparents, spoiling the children and passing on stories of the old days. As they aged, they remained devoted to each other. They took daily walks when weather permitted, still holding hands like newlyweds. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land they had saved together. And every night, they went to bed in each other's arms, thankful for another day. In the summer of 1912, when Patrick was 58 and Theresa 51, they celebrated their 30th anniversary. The family threw a grand party, with friends and neighbors coming from all over to celebrate the couple who had built the Dusty Creek Ranch into one of the area's most successful operations. During the party, Patrick stood to give a toast. The crowd quieted, and he looked at Theresa with all the love in his heart. 30 years ago, I was a desperate man facing impossible odds. I had inherited a failing ranch and debts I could not pay. But I also inherited a contract for a mail-order bride. When Theresa stepped off that train, I had no idea I was meeting the woman who would save my life in every way that mattered. He raised his glass. She saved the ranch with her hard work and brilliance. She gave me 3 beautiful children and helped raise them into the fine adults they are today. But most importantly, she gave me her heart, and she has been my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life for 30 wonderful years. To Theresa, who saved everything. There was not a dry eye in the house as everyone raised their glasses. To Theresa. She stood and kissed him, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. That night, after everyone had gone home and the ranch was quiet, they lay in bed together. Theresa traced patterns on Patrick's chest, something she had done for years when she was thinking. "What is it?" he asked. "I was just thinking about that scared girl who got off the train 30 years ago. She had no idea what she was getting into. She was so frightened and alone. What would you tell her if you could?" Theresa smiled. "I would tell her that everything is going to be all right. Better than all right. I would tell her that she is about to meet the man she will love for the rest of her life, and together they will build something beautiful. I would tell her to be brave, because it will all be worth it." Patrick pulled her close. "I would tell that terrified young man on the platform the same thing. That he is about to meet a woman who will change his life completely. That he should trust her, listen to her, and love her with everything he has, because she is going to be the best thing that ever happened to him." They held each other in the darkness, 2 people who had started as strangers and become soulmates. Outside, the ranch they had saved together slept peacefully under the Colorado stars. The years continued to pass gently. Patrick and Theresa aged gracefully, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with the evidence of years spent laughing and working in the sun. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by decades of partnership and mutual respect. They saw the ranch transition fully to the next generation, with James taking over complete operations while they enjoyed a well-earned retirement. They traveled a bit, visited family, and spent time with their growing collection of grandchildren. But mostly, they enjoyed each other. Simple pleasures like morning coffee on the porch, evening walks, reading together by the fire. They had worked hard for so many years, and now they had the luxury of simply being together. In the spring of 1920, on a beautiful April morning very much like the one when Theresa had first arrived, Patrick and Theresa took a walk to the ridge overlooking the ranch. They were both in their 60s now, moving slower but still active. They sat on the same spot where they had sat so many times before, looking out at the land that had become their whole life. "You have any regrets?" Patrick asked. Theresa thought for a moment. "No, not a single one. Every choice led me here to this life with you. How could I regret that?" "I feel the same way. Even the hard times were worth it because we faced them together." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "What do you think happens next? After this life, I mean. I do not know, but I hope that wherever we go together. I cannot imagine eternity without you." "Me neither. Promise me, Patrick. Promise that even death will not separate us, that we will find each other again somehow." He took her hand and kissed it. "I promise. In this life and whatever comes after, I am yours." They sat together as the sun climbed higher, warming the spring day. Below them, the ranch bustled with activity. Their children and grandchildren worked the land, continuing the legacy Patrick and Theresa had started all those years ago. It was a good life, well lived. Built on love and hard work and the courage to take a chance on a stranger who turned out to be a soulmate. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Theresa thought about that terrified girl on the train platform and smiled. She had been so scared, so uncertain about what she was walking into. But that fear had led her to the greatest adventure of her life. Patrick looked at his wife, still beautiful to him after nearly 40 years, and sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For the uncle who had made a desperate choice that turned into a blessing. For the ranch that had brought them together. For every day they had been given, but mostly he gave thanks for Theresa herself. The mail-order bride who had saved a failing ranch, yes. But more importantly, the woman who had saved him, who had given him a life beyond his wildest dreams, who had loved him completely and without reservation. They reached the house as the sun reached its peak, bathing everything in golden light. Their family was gathered for Sunday dinner, a tradition they had started years ago and maintained faithfully. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. Patrick and Theresa stood on the porch for a moment before going in, just taking it all in. The ranch, the family, the life they had built together from nothing but determination and hope. "Ready?" Theresa asked. Patrick smiled and took her hand. "Always, as long as I am with you." They walked inside together, into the warmth and love and chaos of their family, into the life they had fought for and won. Outside, the ranch spread under the endless Colorado sky, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they chose to work together, to trust each other, to love without limits. The Dusty Creek Ranch would continue for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But it all started with a desperate cowboy, a failing ranch, and a mail-order bride who saved both. And in the end, that was the greatest success of all. Not the prosperous ranch or the financial security, but the love story that began on a train platform and lasted a lifetime. The story of Patrick and Theresa Ellis, two strangers who became partners, then friends, then lovers, and finally soulmates. Their love had saved the ranch, yes. But more than that, it had saved each other. And that legacy of love would endure long after they were gone, living on in their children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the courage to take a chance on the unknown. Years later, when both Patrick and Theresa had passed peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, their family gathered to celebrate their lives. The stories were told again, about the young cowboy who inherited a failing ranch and the brave woman who came west to help save it. About how they had built an empire from nothing, raised a family, and loved each other for more than 50 years. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren listened in awe, unable to imagine the struggles and sacrifices their grandparents had endured. But they could see the evidence all around them in the thriving ranch, the strong family bonds, and the values of hard work and partnership that had been passed down through the generations. The Dusty Creek Ranch stood as a monument to what Patrick and Theresa had accomplished together. But their true legacy was not measured in acres or cattle or dollars. It was measured in love, in the family they had created, in the example they had set of what a true partnership could be. And somewhere, perhaps on a ridge overlooking a ranch bathed in golden light, two spirits walked hand in hand, together for eternity as they had always been meant to be. Patrick and Theresa Ellis, the cowboy and the mail-order bride who had saved each other and built a legacy of love that would never die.